Dr. Tracy Brower is a PhD sociologist, and she studies work-life fulfillment and happiness. And that's always a great topic. But right now, after the 2 years we've been through, and could say the 3 years we're going through, or the 10 years we're going through, I don't know how long the challenge is going to last, but this is a great topic for right now. She's the Vice President of Workplace Insights at Steelcase. In addition, she's the author of The Secrets to Happiness at Work, and we have a copy of her book for you. If you would like one, it'll make you happy when you leave. But you do have to read it. Just holding it won't do it. So, and she also wrote a book, Bring Work to Life. And she contributes to Forbes regularly, Forbes.com and Fast Company. Her stuff's been translated into 17 languages, and she's on, she has a website, tracybrower.com, and then she's, of course, on all the social media outlets. So I'm thrilled that Tracy said, I'd love to speak to your alumni. So let's give her a nice big welcome.
Well, my checks must be clearing to Roger. Thank you for that introduction. I super appreciate it. I'm so happy to be here with you all. It's just wonderful. Yeah, sitting next to Roger at TEDx, I was like, who's this awesome human next to me? He's just like, he's got a vision, and he was talking about leaders and a hotbed for leaders in West Michigan, and I thought, that's a really good idea. I wonder how that'll go. And here we are all these years later, 7 or 8 years later. So, and then I hear about all of your best learnings from your classes, and I think, gosh, I've got to get myself educated. I am missing out. So I need to sign up for the next cohort for sure, you all. So I also think that there is something really important about this networking thing and about the space between people and the power of our connections. Like, I love your question about what motivates us, what's our mission, what's the thing that drives us. And for me, it's learning new things, but it's also the connections and relationships that we build with each other and the way that that works in terms of our power together and our influence together and the way that we impact on each other, even in the smallest kinds of interactions that we have. It's sort of like boiling water, right? The molecules are moving faster, and steam can power so many things, locomotives, for example. And statistically, if you look at the data on networking, when there are more connections happening more frequently, more quickly, that is when you get hotbeds of activity, of progress, of innovation. That's why Boston works the way it does in terms of bioscience. That's why Silicon Valley works the way it does. There's just beautiful research on this topic. So I'm so excited to be with you all today and part of the network that we all are on a mission together working on. They say that whatever you study in school, you should make sure you kind of like it because you're going to end up talking about it for a while. And I definitely drew the long straw in terms of work life and fulfillment and happiness. And I think now is such an important time to have this conversation. I was talking to a journalist and he said, Tracy, you know, are you a little tone deaf? Like, is now really the time to be talking about happiness? Things are upside down and inside out. Like, what you're not paying attention to reality. But actually, when things are upside down and inside out, when there is so much disruption, that is the time when we can reset and reimagine. It is catalyzing times with each other and with our own sense of ourselves and what we bring. So now is the time to have a great conversation about happiness and where we go from here together. I think this is really interesting times because this will be the most significant reinvention of work in our experience. Like, we might have waked up 3 years ago and thought, you know, I have a sense of purpose. I feel good about what I'm doing. I have influence. But now the world is thinking so consciously about what we do, about why we do it, about with whom, about for whom we work. And so this will be such an important reinvention of the way we think about the work that we do. And I always get so sad, frustrated, angry sometimes when I hear us talk about work in the popular press as a bad thing, right? Like you say, what's your favorite part about work? And people say PTO, or they say weekends, or right? And there's so much press right now about quiet quitting or do as little as you can, but work is actually such an important part of who we are, of how we contribute, of how we express our gifts and our talents, of how we make a difference in our community, of the obligation and responsibility that we have to each other. And that, to me, is the connection that we have between each other. That is the system. And so this is our moment as leaders to make such an impact on how people think about what they do and how they contribute. And I think that leadership today, there are so many things today we say, oh, it's so different today than it used to be. And we're right about so many of those things. And I think leadership is like that. Like leadership has always been a big challenge and super rewarding. But the emotional labor that goes along with leadership today, I think it makes it even more tough, challenging, and even more rewarding. So we may have differences in how much work is reinvented by region, by industry, by job, but as a society, we are in this moment of reinventing the way that we think about work. So here we are. These are good times to be leading and good times to be doing the kinds of work that we all are doing. So I think part of what makes this an important moment is the talent revolution. And you all can't open a newspaper, figuratively. Does anybody remember newspapers? Is willing to admit it? You can't open a newspaper, figuratively speaking, without hearing about the talent revolution. And I think the talent revolution, the Great Resignation, is some of the best evidence that the way we were doing it before wasn't perfect, and that we can think about doing things differently in terms of how people feel about the work that they do, how much development they get, in what ways they choose to engage, the conditions that we create in businesses and for people and teams that help them to feel like they want to make their best contribution. And the other thing that's fascinating to me is that this talent revolution is not going anywhere for many years. I just listened to another is anybody part of the Grand Rapids Economics Club? That's such a cool group. I learned so much there. And I just saw an economist speaking again this year. And the challenge with the talent revolution, it is significantly driven by demographics. It's not that people don't want to work who are young and in entry-level roles. It's that they don't exist. Like the birth rates have shifted. And there also isn't a large cohort coming. So this talent revolution is going to be here to stay demographically. And that makes our roles even more important in terms of how we engage people and how we create the conditions for them to be their best and us to be our best, because we will need all the brain power in the room, because we won't have people trying to break down the door to get in the room. And so this will be a moment for us to really think about engaging people differently. So let's talk a minute about happiness. I think this is good stuff, because we sometimes get it wrong in terms of how we understand happiness as a society. What it means to be happy is to, statistically, scientifically, is to have a sense of dedication. Like you are absolutely dedicated to what you're doing. And there's something about what you're doing that motivates you at an intrinsic level. The other thing about happiness is you tend to get really immersed in what you're doing. Like you kind of lose track of time. You get going on something, you get into flow, and you look up and you're like, oh my goodness, where did the time go? It's that thing that you want that makes you turn on again in the evening, even after you've been to 6 soccer games and 2 swimming events and 6 volunteer activities. You're still wanting to make that contribution. And there is a vigor component. Like we feel energized when we are doing work that makes us happy, and it energizes us. It's like a two-way street of energy. And there is an important part of mattering. We all have an instinct to matter. There is a wonderful book by Atul Gawande called On Being Mortal, or actually it's called Just Being Mortal. And one of the things it talks about is the worst thing you can say to somebody is, we're good, we don't need your help, we're good here. We all want to matter. We have an instinct to matter. We want to be included. We want to know that our brain is necessary at that particular table, that particular party, that particular meeting. And so when we feel good about what we're doing, these are the kinds of things that we're probably experiencing. But it's not all that. There are also some myths that go along with happiness. Like one of the myths of happiness is the myth of constancy. Like we feel like we should always be happy. And if we're doing it right, then we're always happy all the time and it's always bonbons and butterflies. And that's just not the way it works. Like we will have up days and down days. We'll have seasons of life that feel harder. We'll have seasons of life that maybe feel a little easier. So while it is about dedication and vigor and all of those things, it doesn't have to be about that every single day, every single minute. Like there may be projects that you're not so thrilled about. And there may be moments in your career or periods where you're like, oh my goodness, I had to get up this morning and put 2 feet in front of each other. And so that is true about happiness as well. Another one that I think is important to know is the myth of choice. We have this idea that if we make the right choices, we shall always be happy. If we choose the right place to live, if we choose the right partner, if we choose the right job, we will have all of the goodies. And in truth, the choices that we make are sets of conditions. So I might choose a place to live and there are things I love about that place, but oh my gosh, the winters in Michigan. Or I might choose a partner who I adore, but if I'm really honest, there might be a couple things that are a little annoying about him. Larry, don't mention that when we see each other next. And in a job, there will be things we love to do, and there will be things not so much. And I think that's part of how we create the conditions for happiness is we have to think about like, it's almost like a Venn diagram and you want more overlap between the circles. What do you love to do? What do you have to do? And how do you have as much overlap of those as possible? Knowing you'll always still have to do those darn expense reports. And for me anyway, they're in the circle that isn't about happiness. They're in the circle that's just like, gotta get it done. So that's true too. Choices are part of happiness to the extent that we can make the best choice possible with sets of conditions. And the other thing that I think is so important to know is that we are about our own happiness. We as, citizens of the Western world and Western culture tend to believe that happiness shall happen when the silver platter comes. And we pull off the top of the silver platter. You kind of hear the ding when you pull the top off the silver platter. And when all the conditions are right, then we shall be happy. When everything turns out with the project, when we get through that especially tough customer, when we get through this great resignation, when the pandemic is done, when we get the new job, when we figure out the right person to hire onto our team, when all those things happen, right, then happiness will come. But in reality, we can create the conditions for happiness no matter what's going on around us. And we are utterly empowered to do that. And so that's really liberating, right? Like we don't have to wait for the things around us. And it's a both and. Of course, conditions matter, but we also can create our own sets of conditions within the situation that we're living in. Does that make sense to you all? All right, way to go. Here's the last thing about myths. There is a happiness paradox, right? Like we are about the pursuit of happiness in this country. That is part of our values. But when we pursue happiness for its own sake, statistically, we are less likely to accomplish happiness. The reason is that we tend to be focused on what we don't already have. Otherwise, why would we be trying to reach that thing? And that tends to focus us on ourselves. And statistically, when you focus on others, when you focus on the community, when you focus on what you're giving instead of what you're getting, that is highly correlated with happiness. So if you're seeking it for its own sake, it's going to be tough to reach and super amorphic and kind of disappearing like fog. But when you seek to create the conditions for happiness, that will get you there. And we will talk about what those are. All right, you all. This is the moment when great business leaders say, yeah, but Tracy, happiness is pretty fluffy. We have to get results. We need to make our quarter end. We need to work on. So really, we don't have time for this. But there is so much research on happiness and the extent to which happiness absolutely drives business results. When people are happier, they set bigger goals. They're more likely to reach them. They tend to perform better. They tend to be physically healthier. They tend to be more likable. And so they're contributing to a likability and a positivity in your culture. And this operates at the personal level, like I'm personally more physically capable when I'm happier. I'm feeling better about my performance. It operates at the company level. It also operates at the country level. When countries' citizens are happier, they tend to have greater GDP, greater educational attainment, and greater physical health as a country. So this is where it actually matters, and it's a really good business to think about happiness. So here's a question for you. We are going to do this in the old-fashioned way. We don't need Slido. We don't need Metro Vote, whatever that one is called. We're going to raise our hands. Do you remember doing that in school? All right, here we go. I'm going to read the question, and then I'm going to come back to you and ask for your answer. To what extent has your happiness at work changed in the last couple of years? A, my happiness at work has increased. B, there have been some ups and downs, but overall, my happiness has pretty much stayed the same. C, my happiness at work has declined. Or D, the jury is still out for me on this one. Anybody for A, happiness has increased? Whoa, look at you all. That's like 80%-ish. Awesome. How about B, any ups and downs? Comme ci, comme ça? Oh, that must not have been 80% because that looks like another 80%. This is very scientific. All of you analyticals in the room are like, oh my gosh, this is going downhill quickly. All right, I promise it'll be okay. It'll be okay. Anybody for C? Any declines? Yeah, okay, cool, fair, super fair. And anybody for D? Jury's kind of still out? Yeah, okay, awesome. This is important because we might be in different places. And I always like to think of our situation as leaders and then the situation of the people around us, right? Like if we're on top of the world, it's easier sometimes than if we're also down in the dumps. And so part of this is, you all know this better than I do, but part of it is really understanding and appreciating where you're at and being able to reflect on that and kind of move forward from it. So it's super helpful. But the best way to predict the future is to create it. So let's talk about how we create the conditions for happiness. I would love to take a pause and have you talk to a neighbor. You can stay at your tables, but I'd like you to just give thought to when you had a situation at work where you felt really energized and joyful and happy and purposeful. And just take a minute and think about that, and then just take a very short time and share that with the one or two people next to you. So let's do kind of triads. And if the numbers don't work out at your table, do dyads. So groups of 2 or groups of 3, just with the person next to you. Group of 2, group of 3. Think about and just very, very briefly describe a situation where you felt happy in the work that you were doing. And maybe just take 5 or 6 minutes for this. This is like a short share. Make sense? All right? Okay, go ahead. All right, let's get back together. That's so cool. I love it. All right, here we go. Are you ready? I'm reading a book right now, and the main character always says, awesome sauce. So, awesome sauce. Thank you for that. That was good. Was that easy or hard? Is it easy to think of some of those joyful moments at work? Yeah? I'll be curious the character of those moments. I'm going to check in with you on that as we keep going forward. So yeah, joyful moments at work are not always every single day. A lot of times they're here and there, and a lot of times they're associated with big challenges or big problems. Or I love Elizabeth's analogy where you go through hard times, and sometimes you remember the best parts of that without necessarily remembering the pain that went along with it. I think you literally referenced childbirth, but that was the theme that we can take from that, no matter what your gender, right? Or no matter whether you have kids or not. All right, so how do we create joy in our work? One of the first things that we can do is focus on purpose. This is a very big deal. Statistically, when businesses have a sense of purpose, they are very much more likely to achieve the kinds of results that shareholders and stakeholders want. That is well documented in a Harvard study, but this is also true for individuals. When individuals have a sense of purpose, they tend to feel better about themselves, feel better about their contribution, be more physically healthy, be more fulfilled. There is a beautiful concept called ikigai. Is anybody familiar with ikigai? So ikigai is a concept in Okinawa, Japan. Okinawa is one of the blue zones where people live to be ridiculously old ages in amazingly good health. And one of the commonalities of people who live in blue zones like Okinawa is that they have a sense of ikigai. Ikigai is your reason to wake up in the morning. And so this is the Japanese grandmother that wakes up every morning to make soup for her family. So what's your soup for your family? Here's the problem with purpose. I think sometimes purpose has this giant capital letter P followed by a giant capital letter U, R, etc. We think purpose has got to be so big, right? We've got to solve world peace, we've got to solve world hunger, we've got to, right? But purpose can be small things as well. It can be that small influence that you have. It can be that really great thing that you do well, you do competently, the thing you bring to the team. And so purpose is one of the ways that we create the conditions for happiness. And so this is about us reminding ourselves of our purpose, and it's about us reminding others of kind of that line of sight, that alignment, right? That sense that my work affects his work and her work and their work, and ultimately the work that affects our customers. Our daughter's a couple years out of college, and our son is a junior in college. I got to tell you, we have been on no less than 15 college visits in our time as parents. Our children were very discerning. They really wanted to make sure they picked the right school. So we went to a lot of college visits with them. And every single college talked to the kids about, hey, you should come here because we will help you change the world. We will help you make incredible impact. And I sat there thinking, that's really cool. Who doesn't want to change the world and have incredible impact? But also oh my gosh, the weight of the world, right? Are you telling me I have to change the world, or can I just be a really important influence in the world? And so I think purpose is this really important sort of dynamic tension between being hopeful and being future focused and thinking about all the ways that we want to make huge impact, and then just doing that on a day-to-day basis, kind of removing the pressure from ourselves and feeling good about whatever small step we make in the big journey. I think it's a balance of those two things. So we don't have to have the weight of the world on ourselves, and we can have that future focus. Here's something else I think about leadership. I think that leadership is fundamentally about hope for the future. Because everything we do as leaders at some level is about the future, right? We're setting expectations. We're managing performance to where we want to go. We're thinking about the next level of innovation that we need. We're thinking about the next problem we're going to solve for the customer. We're thinking about the next. We're thinking about the next. That is part of what leadership is. And that requires hope at sort of a fundamental level. So I think that's about purpose, and I think that's about future. So part of the way that we create the conditions for happiness is by being cognizant of purpose, by reminding ourselves and others of purpose. Here's a question for you. I love this one. Same thing, I'm going to read it, and then I'll come back to you and ask. If you won the lottery, would you still work? A, absolutely. I would do exactly what I do today. I was born for it. B, yes and no. I might not do exactly what I do today, but I would certainly do volunteer work to your nonprofit efforts. No way, you would find me on an island somewhere. Or D, it depends. How many millions am I winning? I know we have you analyticals in the group. All right, A, anybody absolutely precisely what I'm doing today? I was born for it. These are the people to talk to on the break. That's awesome, you all. Thank you, thank you. Anybody B? Maybe not precisely, but yeah, there's 93% of you. Awesome. I know, some of you are like, oh, you're just shivering. All right, C, no way, I'd be on an island. Is there anybody with a margarita or an iced tea in their hand? No one? Oh my gosh, okay. This is a special group. Somebody, okay, good. Thank God. Oh, thank goodness. You're human after all. No, I'm kidding. D, anybody just want to know how much you're winning before you answer the question? Excellent. Yes, excellent. And somebody reminded me not too long ago, it's a new day. You could be on the island and you could be doing your volunteer work from your laptop, right? This is cool stuff. This says that work is so important and purpose is so important and we would all do something. This is that idea of mattering. And this is cool because it is a survey that's been run, a sociological survey that's been run for over 20 years globally. And regardless of region, country, age, or gender, 93% of people on average say answer B. I may not do exactly what I do today, but I would do something. I would want to make a contribution. So I think this is the purpose thing, and I think this is the impact that we all have with each other and on each other. All right, so let's take a pause and talk about identity. I would love you to talk to me on a break or afterwards and give me your ideas about this. I'm working really hard on this idea of work and identity. I think that when we have identity wrapped up in our work, it can be a really good thing. Like what we do is partly about who we are, and that can be a good thing. And I know that we need to be careful about that because if all of our identity comes from our work, that is less helpful. It's actually true that the more different things you have a sense of identity from, the more different things you get a sense of esteem from, the more you'll feel happy and fulfilled. And work is a source of identity as well. So I think it's a both and I think it's partly about the right mix. So I'm curious what you all think about this. So give some thought to that and follow up with me and let me know what you think. But I think this identity idea actually started during the Industrial Revolution. And God forbid we will not idealize the Industrial Revolution by any stretch. There were terrible things that occurred during the Industrial Revolution. But one of the things that happened is that we were typically rural. We were working on farms, we were agrarian, we were side by side in the field with our family members, and we were, side by side churning butter and, harvesting grain. We were side by side with our family and our close friends doing work. And then, en masse, we moved into cities. And all of a sudden, we were bakers with other bakers. All of a sudden, we were putting horseshoes on horses next to other people putting horseshoes on horses. And so our identity started to come from our work more than it started to come from the things that we were doing with our family. And so I just think that's an interesting way to think about it. So I think the takeaway message is how much is too much, and do we have the right kinds of identity from different sources, a good thing, and in what ways do we think about the contributions we make, and in what ways are we really clear about the esteem that we get from the work that we do, and how do we reinforce that with ourselves? How do we think about what we are uniquely gifted at and good at, and really remind ourselves of that, and really feel good about the work that we do at the same time that we're humble and know that we're always learning and none of us are ever perfect. So I think that identity piece is a good one to consider. And one of the most significant contributors to bonding is surviving hard times together. And so we are at that moment where bonding is happening, has happened, and at the same time, there's so much distance. The incidence right now of mental health challenges, of depression, anxiety, loneliness are exponentially increased. I watch so much research, and there is not a week that goes by that there isn't a new study on the increasing incidence of depression, anxiety, loneliness, and mental health issues. The reason is that we've had so much distance from each other. Our instinct as humans is to gather together when there's danger or threat, and that's what we haven't been able to do. And so we've been distant from each other, both literally and figuratively, and we've also reduced friction around us. So this is an unintended consequence of so much convenience, right? Like, I don't go to Target. I love Target, but I don't go to Target anymore. I get a lovely box from Target. When I need something from Target, I order it online. I don't talk to the person in the grocery line at Target anymore. Or I have my dry cleaning delivered on Tuesdays and Fridays. I don't talk to the person at the dry cleaner anymore. Or if I want a cappuccino, I order it on my app. I don't talk to the barista anymore. Life is extraordinarily convenient, but there's no more friction, right? Like, we've removed friction, but one of the unintended consequences is we've also removed those opportunities for superficial interactions with each other. And statistically, when you have more superficial interaction, it actually contributes to your happiness. Like, you don't have to have deep, meaningful relationships with the barista, but just, hey, having that good morning in the morning or afternoon or whenever you love your coffee is actually contributing to happiness. And so the reason this is important to us is because work and the work experience, whether it's hybrid or remote or in person, ends up being this newly expanded, newly enhanced, important place in society that we connect, that we make friends, that we come together. Because if it's not happening at the dry cleaner or at Target or with the barista, it's happening at work fundamentally. And that can be the person that I run into at the coffee machine. It can be the person I run into when I'm hanging up my coat. It can be the person that I see across the work cafe who I don't even know, but we showed up together to do good work. Or it can be the person on video camera if you're working remotely. So I think the role of work and the role of the work experience for us to have these connections ends up being extraordinarily important as we've lost them. And we are hardwired for community and generosity. So here's the takeaway. One of the ways that we create the conditions for happiness is to create the conditions for connection and for people to come together in really meaningful ways. When we feel connected with others, we feel a greater level of happiness neurologically. When we feel excluded, we feel pain in our brain, in the exact part and region of our brain where we feel physical pain. So if somebody punched you in the gut, you would experience that in the same part of your brain where you might experience it if you feel excluded from something. We are hardwired for connection, and the research on this is just extraordinary. And this is true of both introverts and extroverts. We might need connection in different amounts and different depths over time, but we all need some level of connection. In fact, I think it's either today or later this week, I have a new article coming out in Fast Company about why introverts need the office. And sometimes it can be hard for introverts to just mingle and kind of just make friends at yoga, right? Like, how do you move it from the, hey, how you doing once a week to the, hey, let's get coffee, right? Like, that can be hard. And so one of the things that works really well is the task orientation at work and the structure that comes from work. There's a myth of mingling. We think that we're going to mingle and meet new people. But a lot of times if we're mingling, we're just talking to the people that we already knew. So your networking this morning is a perfect example of structure that helps everybody to feel like they can connect in ways that also feel safe. And sometimes that is what the work environment gives us as well. So whether we're introverts or extroverts, we need that deeper level of connection with each other as well as that superficial connection. And it is very cool to think of work and friendship. So we make friends at work. 75% of people say that they make their closest friends at work. That is absolutely followed by the friends that we make in high school and college. That's the other place that people report they make tons of friends. And work ends up being not only a place where we make friends, but 81% of people say they make their more diverse relationships and friendships at work. So in our personal life, we might end up socializing with people who look like us or sound like us or think like us. And work is often the place where we run into people who are more different than what we are. And the reason that work is such a special place to make friends is there are a few reasons for that. One is work has continuity over time. Is anybody old enough to remember when we used to work at jobs for a really long time and you'd review resumes, and if somebody moved every couple of years, they were a job hopper, and you'd be like, no, we don't want that person. Does anybody remember that? Okay. Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you. There are so many people who don't remember that. All right. So, and now, right, like we move from job to job to job to job, right? 1 or 2 years and you're moving on. But even if you're at a job for a relatively short period of time, that's still overtime that you're able to work with somebody and get to know them over time. So work is a source of friendship and connection because of that time element. The other reason that work is a wonderful source of friendship is because of both the task and relationship element of it. Relationship, you're with somebody at the coffee machine and you're like, hey, how was that parents' weekend? You know, what did you think of the game? How's your marathon preparation going, right? Whatever the thing is on just a relationship basis. And you get to interact with people on task. You're rolling up your sleeves, you're solving problems, you're sitting in the meeting room, you're figuring it out, you're putting your brains into that tough problem or that tough customer challenge that you have in front of you. So you get both task and relationship. And the other thing that happens at work is you get the ups and the downs. Like you see somebody on the day when they're like, yes, I'm on top of the world today. And you see people when they walk in and they're like, you know, not so much today. So you get all of that range from people that you're with. And that makes work a really important place that we make friends and retain and sustain friendships. Here's the other thing, and this has to do with diversity and equity and inclusion. When we see each other more frequently, we have more data about each other, and we tend to accept each other more. Familiarity breeds acceptance. This works with food. This works with art. Like if you have to walk by the same wacky piece of art day after day after day, over time, you will start to accept it more. Or if you have somebody serve you some weird, wacky food more frequently than less frequently, and you just kind of keep tasting it, you will often develop a greater acceptance of that food. It may not become your favorite, but you'll develop a greater acceptance of it. And that tends to happen with relationships as well. Proximity is the #1 determinant of relationship. When we see each other more, we have greater acceptance. When we see each other more, we have more data about each other. When we see each other more, we tend to build stronger bonds together. And part of what's happening is that we just know more about each other. Like when you walked in the door this morning and you had a scowl on your face, if I didn't know you very well, I could think, oh, what did I do wrong? Or, oh, something bad's going on with the business. Or, oh, he, she, they are mad at me for some reason, right? But if you walk in with a scowl on your face and I know you just that much more, I happen to know you got a puppy and you're not sleeping at night. And so by goodness, you're just tired this morning. And so we tend to have more data. And so we are less likely to jump to conclusions that are less gracious. And we tend to be more forgiving and give grace. We were talking about that this morning. So that's why we come together at work and we're able to really connect with friends. And this is one of the conditions for happiness, is connection, generosity, and the time that we spend together. On average, we develop a close friendship when we spend 60 hours together. So work may or may not be the place for friends. Here's another thing that I think is kind of fun to think about. So I wrote an article about friendship, and there was a giant debate that ensued on LinkedIn. And some people said, yes, of course we make friends at work. That's a great place to make friends. And other people said, absolutely not. Work is not the place for friendship. That is a place for collegial relationships, but it's not appropriate to have friends at work. And then finally, so there was this debate ensuing, and then finally somebody stepped in and said, well, what we really need are cultures that are friendly. Isn't that good? I thought that was a good compromise situation. So give some thought to How do you think about friends at work? And the way that we create the conditions for happiness is by creating more opportunities for connection. That looks like more places where people connect. That looks like projects that cross swim lanes. That looks like connecting people not just through social interaction, like, I don't know, your mixology class or your axe throwing or your escape room, but also mixing people on projects where they have to cross boundaries and cross responsibilities. Those kinds of connection opportunities are a very big deal in terms of creating the conditions for happiness. Here's a question for you. In what ways have your relationships changed in the last couple of years? A, I have greater quality and quantity of relationships. B, it's spotty. Some relationships have deepened and some have faded away. C, my circle has gotten a lot smaller, honestly. Or D, my best friends are the people on my Netflix shows. God forbid your best friends are Game of Thrones, right? House of Dragons. All right, no judgment, no judgment. I'm on Sunday nights watching too. All right, you all. How about A, anybody greater quality and quantity? Some of you. Small group. Okay. How about B, it's spotty, some relationships? Okay, yeah, big majority. C, my circle has gotten a lot smaller, honestly. Yes, absolutely. And D, anyone for Netflix? All right. Yeah, this one is a big deal. One of the things that we're working with an organization right now, and they've been doing pulse surveys for people, and they ask about quality and quantity of relationships. And any good sociologist can plot on a 2x2, right? So quality of relationships, high, medium, low, quantity of relationships, high, medium, low. And many organizations are seeing the decline of both quality and quantity. One of the things, there was a national survey that was done with hundreds of thousands of people about 6 months ago, and a very significant majority of people said that they had kind of pruned their relationships, that they were being more selective about who they spent time with. They were being more selective about really spending time with the people and in the relationships that they valued most. So that's one of the unintended or intended, I guess, consequences of coming out of something that has turned us upside down. All right, another way that we create the conditions for happiness is through gratitude. Statistically, when you feel a greater level of gratitude, you tend to be happier. And that is not just gratitude for things, that is gratitude for people, that is gratitude for conditions. I drive a 1979 black VW Bug. It is a beautiful and incredible and impressive machine. I'm telling you, this 1979 VW Bug, it's exciting. I am one with the road. Sometimes the windshield wipers work, sometimes they don't. Mostly the brakes work, mostly the accelerator works. It's very exciting. And it's wonderful. And I'm so appreciative of being able to drive that incredible machine down the road. However, it's just a thing, right? And gratitude and the power of gratitude is significantly more about people, about conditions, about not things. Statistically, when we spend money on things for ourselves, we're less likely to gain happiness than if we spend money on experiences. We're also less likely to be happy when we spend money on ourselves versus spending money on others. And so there's something about gratitude, about being grateful for what we have, and about being intentional about gratitude. Waking up in the morning and thinking, I'm really, grateful for these things today, or going to bed at night and thinking, I'm grateful for these things that happened to me during the day earlier. And so that intentionality about gratitude is a very big deal. Enjoy the little things, for one day you may look back and realize they were the big things. All right, you all. Another condition for happiness is when we have the opportunity to perform at our best. I said earlier that we all have an instinct to matter. And so this is a big deal in terms of how we structure work, in terms of how we structure rewards, in terms of how we structure the time that we spend, whether we're in volunteer work or in paid work. When we feel like we can really make a difference and when we can perform well, that is a very important condition for happiness. So this is, I think, partly about match. I think part of the takeaway message is that we want to do something where we really feel like we're good at it to enough of an extent. We'll talk about challenge and stretch in a minute, but being able to perform well and people feeling a sense of recognition and reward for that performing well is a big deal in terms of happiness. Here's a word on leadership as we're talking about performance. sometimes we can think about the question of happiness and whether you are responsible for other people's happiness or not. And I think sometimes you can push back on me, and I'd love for you to talk about this when we get to kind of open Q&A. But I feel like we aren't necessarily responsible for other people's happiness because they need to be responsible for their own. But we can be responsible for creating the conditions for happiness. If we know it's about connection, if we know it's about a sense of purpose, if we know it's about empowering people to perform, if we know it's about expressing gratitude and giving people the things to be grateful for, conditions at work to be grateful for, then I think we can absolutely have a hand in happiness. And I'm a big believer in both agency and structure. Agency, I am an agent. I am in charge of my own destiny to some extent, and I'm going to do everything I can to create great conditions for happiness. And we know there are structural conditions for happiness. There are systemic conditions that affect whether or not that agency is easier or harder. And so as leaders, we can be models for other people as we are empowered to create the conditions for our own happiness. And we can be the people who make some of those structures happen, either really create the conditions for happiness or maybe don't focus on it enough and it may be more challenging for people. So I think there's something about, again, this leadership laser. When we are leaders, people focus on us more than we even think, right? Like we are humble leaders and we don't have it all figured out and we're always learning. But people will absolutely put outsized focus on what you say and what you do and how you show up. And that's true for all humans in the way that we influence each other. But when we're leaders, we're under a laser. Is anybody, I know I keep asking you about these old enough questions. Is anybody old enough to remember that movie called The Accidental Tourist? It had Gina Davis. Oh, good. Oh, excellent. Gina Davis was in it. I'm not sure it was like the best movie in the whole world, but I love the title. The Accidental Tourist makes me think of leaders who, even if you don't mean to be all that, right? Like you're not trying to be all that, people are still focusing on what you say and what you do and how you show up. And so there is this responsibility for how we are with other people and how we are with ourselves. And that has to do with both agency, how we're empowering ourselves and the actions we're taking, and structure, the way that we're influencing the conditions around others. So here's a question for you. To what extent has your personal or leadership style changed in the last couple of years? A ton. I feel like I'm doing things very differently today. B, some. I think I'm basically the same with some evolution of my approach. C, not a bit. I haven't changed at all. Or D, you'll have to ask my coworkers for the real scoop on this one. Anybody A, you've totally changed? Wow, look at that. That's got to be like 20-ish, 15-ish, 20% of you. How about B? Anybody some? I'm basically the same. Big majority. Excellent. Anybody not a bit? I haven't changed at all. Interesting. Usually I see a couple people in a group and they say not a bit. How about D? Anybody? Don't trust my opinion, trust my gut. Nice, excellent. A couple of you. Yeah, good to get feedback, right? It's not always about intention. Sometimes it's also about impact. Yeah, we have this moment to reset. We have this moment to evolve in our leadership style. So here's the last thing about creating the conditions for happiness. It is about learning and stretch. We don't talk a lot about this one in terms of happiness. But happiness is significantly correlated with the opportunity to stretch, to do something new, to do something we don't know how to do easily. We all need the things we can do with our arms tied behind our back and blindfolded. We all need those moments where we're like, yeah, I got this. But happiness is so correlated with doing things that we don't already know how to do, partly because it stretches us in terms of our new capacity. We're reminded, hey, I can go further than I went before, or hey, I'm tapping into new skills that I didn't already have figured out. Often when we're in a situation of challenge or problem solving, we're working with other people and we're rolling up our sleeves together and we're burning the midnight oil together in a good way. And that brings us back to the connection piece as well. But learning and stretch are a big part of us feeling a sense of happiness. The literature on thriving is pretty cool. The literature on thriving comes out of child development, and it comes out of elite athletes. And the couple of components of thriving, one component of thriving is performance, like wow, I got my best score ever in my 100-yard dash. But thriving always has a component of further development as well. And so thriving is very oriented toward learning and stretch. There's also an 85% rule. The thing that will keep us coming back is if we fail 15% of the time. This has been statistically demonstrated over multiple studies. If you fail more than 15% of the time, you might say to yourself, maybe this isn't my sport, right? Like I might have loved to be a ballet dancer, but it's just not gonna happen for me. Or if you fail less than 15%, you might be like, no, I got this one. I'm good, I wanna go on to my next challenge. So there is something about some level of failure. And I think this is how we put ourselves out there, how we try new things, how we learn new things, how we stretch and grow and really seek to do the new thing that we don't already know how to do. And I think it's about creating those conditions for people that work with us too. Like we give people that new opportunity in a team if they're 70% ready for it, even if they're not 100% ready for it, because that stretch and growth, or giving people development opportunities outside of their swim lane. Stretch, sweating, both literally and figuratively, tend to be extraordinarily correlated with happiness. So these are the ways that we create the conditions for joy. These are the best, there are a million ways, and these are the best 5, is when you create this sense of purpose and connection, when you absolutely feel grateful more of the time, when you perform well and choose the things where you can perform effectively, and when you absolutely find moments to stretch and grow and develop in new ways. And this is just a bonus. These are some unexpected sources of joy that are absolutely scientifically based. You can go to the original literature. I wrote an article on it. I've got links to all of it. So if you get enough sleep anyway, if you get up a little earlier in the morning, you tend to be happier. Anybody nap on Saturday afternoons, Sunday afternoons? Oh, yeah, same, like naps, absolutely. If you nap, that would be a really good thing. If you eat your veggies, that's also a really good thing. The theory is you have more carotenoids circulating in your blood. That's good for happiness. So if you don't like the big stuff, like purpose and connection, just eat some more vegetables and, go skydiving, right? It's really easy. All right. It's amazing how a little tomorrow can make up for a whole lot of yesterday. We are in a new day. It's our moment for a bright future. You all have amazing influence. Sociologically speaking, the number one way that we learn is through watching other people, learning from other people, listening to other people, experiencing other people. And so each of us have such an impact on everybody around us. It's back to the boiling water where the molecules are working and moving really, really quickly. We generate so much steam, so much energy, so much momentum by the way that we interact with other people. And the purpose and the mission that you all are part of, and the mission that you've started, Roger, and that Elizabeth will continue, is an amazing thing to be part of. So I super appreciate it. So thanks you all for your time. We will absolutely have a bright future together. Thank you. All right, all y'all, we have some time for some questions. So I often say y'all, but I was traveling in the South recently, and for a group, you're supposed to say all y'all. So all y'all, we have time for a few questions. I think we've just got like 9 minutes or so for just a few questions. So anybody question, pushback, thoughts you have, thoughts on identity, thoughts on leadership, thoughts on happiness? Questions? Go ahead, Roger.
I have a quick one. So this being about leadership, and you sociologically knows the past, the future, what's going on. So what do you see in the future that going to bring the greatest challenges for leaders?
I think this is such a hard time. I think the greatest challenges are going to be about finding a new path forward for the way that we work, right? Like there's so many different ways that we work, where we work and how we work and the way that we structure work. I think that's one really big challenge in the future. I think another one is just motivating people. I really worry. It keeps me up at night, the extent to which we associate work as being a negative thing. And so I just think we have this role as humans to remind ourselves of all the great work that is work, right? And not to be idealistic about it, not to be Pollyanna. I know there's hard work that people do. There's a beautiful, Martin Luther King Jr. Used to talk about the dignity in work. And I deeply believe that all work has dignity. I worked, years ago, I worked with a very prominent nonprofit philanthropic organization. And they had people working in third world countries. They had people working at their headquarters. They had amazing work that they were doing on peace and water and physical health. And they had people on the front lines, for example, vaccinating pregnant moms in third world countries so moms and babies could stay healthy. And they used to talk about how the most important work of their organization was on the front lines. It was the person giving the vaccination. And then everybody in the back office who was doing accounts payable was kind of like, okay, good to know, right? But I absolutely believe that all work has dignity, no matter what the work is. Martin Luther King Jr. used to talk about, we have huge respect for doctors in our society and people who are in the medical profession and the healing profession, because doctors and people in the healing profession help to reduce the incidence of disease among our loved ones. And he said, people who collect garbage have a really important role to play in our society in reducing the incidence of disease among our loved ones. It's just a really great example of how all work has dignity. So I think part of the leadership challenge is to rethink the pathways for work. And I think part of the leadership challenge is to rethink our perception of work and motivate and engage and give people development opportunities. And then I think the other thing is, I think there's so much emotional labor with leadership, right? Like, we got to pay attention to our own boundaries and well-being and make our own best choices about attending to our own needs. And we got to think about well-being and physical, cognitive, and emotional good health on the parts of our people, because we care about people and because it's the right thing to do. And that is becoming an increasing challenge. So I think those are some of the challenges as I look forward in terms of leadership. But you all will have different points of view on that as well. I'd love to hear about them. Other questions? Go ahead.
Just the concept of happy in work. Like, we started talking about it almost being right now the economy, how do you put the two together?
Yeah, I love that question. How do you motivate? How do you get attention paid to this issue of happiness? And then how do you navigate when everybody defines it differently? I think a really big challenge is people saying, oh, happiness is fluffy, right? Or there's so much emphasis on, the pendulum is swung so far toward employee demands and employee preferences. Even as the economy contracts, the labor market is still extraordinarily competitive. It's a real paradox right now in terms of previous economic downturns have included more of a labor, more surplus in labor, and we're maintaining more scarcity in labor. And so this pendulum continues to be way up here in terms of employee demands. And I think we're seeing some backlash, right? Like, is this all about entitlement? And, how far is too far in terms of those demands? I think that's another challenge. Ultimately, I think we're going to see a shift in the power dynamics in terms of companies and people, and the way that labor markets affect the demands that we pay attention to as employers and leaders. And I think we're in a new day in terms of the extent to which we're focusing on well-being. That is the biggest challenge, is making sure we know that happiness is a business issue and it's a legitimate issue, even if we think the demands have gotten to an extreme. That's one part of your question. And I think the other thing is, absolutely, happiness is in the eye of the experiencer and the beholder. And I think one of the best things we can do is ask people, what do you want? Like, I think sometimes we make the assumption that everybody wants to grow and, more leadership responsibility and more direct reports and more pay, and often that means like more hours and more pressure. And I think we really need to think hard about how we ask the right questions to understand what success looks like and what fulfillment and happiness look like for each person, and to do as much as we can to create the conditions for choice. There's so much research on the extent to which choice and autonomy are also correlated with happiness and fulfillment, and even more importantly, engagement. So we have this opportunity to really find out from people, what's happiness for you? In general, it's the things we all talked about, but it's different for every person. So it's a really great point. All right, Roger, I think we're back to you. And super, super thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. There's time afterward if you want to reconnect with some people you didn't get a chance to. But look for us next year. I don't know what our big event will be, but we're hoping to continue to invest in you as alumni as you continue to help make the mission happen. So thank you all.